What if all you had was full metal jacket or lead round nose ammunition? And I'm going to test some federal ammunition here that's full metal jacket, lead round nose. The main theme here is that they are not hollow point rounds. And I did a test a couple weeks ago where we were testing to see, you know, what would happen if we tested some full metal jacket and 9mm NATO, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45 ACP. And I got a lot of comments in that video of what people wanted to see, and I kind of condensed everything down from all those comments into a test that I think will be kind of interesting. So one of the first things I heard was, you should have used shorter barrels, or can you use shorter barrels? You should have used 147 grain 9mm. You should have used flat point 9mm. You should have used 155 or 165 grain 40 Smith & Wesson. You should test 38 special. So I decided to kind of combine all those things and do some tests with my G2C pistols, one in 9mm and one in 40 Smith & Wesson, and my Taurus 605 revolver here, because they all have essentially the same bullet travel in those guns. So what I did here is I got some 9mm that's 147 grain flat point, and that is rated at 1,000 feet per second. Then I found some 40 Smith & Wesson 155 grain. That is rated at 1160 feet per second. And then last we have our 38 special lead round nose. I was going to go with the 130 grain, but because, you know, that's not flat point and I'm not going to be able to find a flat point in American Eagle ammo, I decided to go with the lead round nose, because this was used as a law enforcement load for like 70 years, and it had the nickname of the Widowmaker. That's not necessarily a good name that it had. A lot of people think, well, that means it's really effective. It actually meant that because, or they called it that because a lot of times cops had to try to stop threats, and it didn't do that good of a job. So they ended up calling it the Widowmaker because it, you know, created a lot of cops' wives into widows. But, you know, it is something that was officially used for a long time, so I think it's a good idea to test it compared to some full metal jackets. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time with all these. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistic test, my real world simulation with all of these shots. So we have 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents our pectoral muscle. Then we have a 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard that's going to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics gel, then another 1/4-inch medium density fiberboard, then 16 more inches of gel, and I have my nice fleece backstop here if those rounds go through all the way. But, you know, you got to remember, clear ballistics gel is roughly a half representation of flesh, so 3 inches and 16 inches is more like 1.5 inches pectoral muscle, 8 inches of flesh, and then back ribs. So we'll see how all these do in that type of simulation with full metal jacket ammo. Then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our flat point 9mm. This is rated at 1,000 feet per second. I believe all these ratings are rated through a 4-inch barrel, 4-inch semi-autos, and a 4-inch revolver. So we're not going to get 1,000, I don't think, but we're rated at 1,000 feet per second. By the way, this is Taurus G2C. Both of these are 3.2-inch barrels, so 0.8 of an inch less than its rated velocity barrel. So let's see how close we get to 1,000 feet per second with our 9mm here. 1,044, wow. 1,032. 1,048. 1,055. 1,052. So we are quite a bit above our rated velocity despite using a shorter barrel than what it's rated out of. So that's very interesting. Now our 40 Smith & Wesson, we are rated at 1165 feet per second. I believe through a 4-inch barrel. Let's see what we get in my Taurus G2C. See how close I get to 1160 feet per second. $1,091. 1156. 1091. 1127. 1106. That's not bad velocity either out of that short barrel. That's pretty good. Now 38 special, this isn't even in the same class for power level, rated only at 770 feet per second. Let's see what I get in this little stub here. $688. 687, 694, 690, 699. So definitely a very low powered cartridge, but very consistent. And consistency is definitely something I like when, you know, choosing defensive cartridges. So let's hit our ballistics gel block with our real world front and back rib simulation, see how these all compare. All right, I'm going to do a couple of shots each into our real world simulation here. 4 layers of sweatshirt material, 3 inches of clear ballistics, 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard rib simulation, 16 inches of clear ballistics, another 1/4 inch medium density rib simulation, medium density fiberboard rib simulation. So let's see what we get here. A couple shots here with our 9mm. Let's go take a look. All right, that did a lot of damage in there, but I'm actually pretty surprised because I thought this would penetrate this entire setup here, both gel blocks. But it looks like from right here, we're seeing tumbling. And I can call it as tumbling because the bullets are facing backwards. And this is the type of damage you get from tumbling rounds. So despite being flat points that should, you know, carry on straight forward, they actually tumbled quite a bit for being a flat point. And that's weird. So very interesting there. Let's hit this with our 40 Smith & Wesson and see how that compares. All right, 40 Smith & Wesson, let's see what this does. Failure to eject that round. One more. Let's go take a look. All right, so very inconsistent performance there. We had a lot of damage here. And by the way, these paths are not intersecting. I know from the front view, sometimes it'll look like that, but from the top, you'd be able to tell it's not. They're making their own channel here. So it looks like with one of our shots with our 40, it started to tumble and lose steam and slow down. Our other 40 went straight through into our fleece bullet stop there. So we'll have to pull that out and take a look at that, but that's very interesting that it was inconsistent like that. So let's hit this with our 38 special. All right, 38 special, let's hit this a couple times, see what happens. Let's go take a look. All right, so those definitely didn't penetrate that far, and we definitely have some tumbling effect going on for sure. So we'll pull this out, we'll take a look and see what we got here through our first rib simulation. Here's our 9mm, here's our 40s, here's our 38 special. So we can see with our 9mm, this one went in straight, this one's starting to kind of keyhole. And our 40 Smith & Wesson, that bottom shot here, that's starting to keyhole. The one that went straight, there's no keyhole through there. And with the 38 special, both of those are keyholing through, which would indicate, they're starting to tumble. So let's definitely slow down quite quickly. Going through our back rib simulation here. And we can see that that top shot with our 9mm is keyholing and tumbling. And right here, it does look like that second 40 Smith & Wesson actually went through the hole that 9mm went through. So that's probably part of the reason that penetrated significantly more than our bottom 40 right here. So that's why I do 2 shots, because you would be like, if something goes wrong, okay, why did that one penetrate so far? That's why. So we won't count that one that went into the backstop there, and we'll just count what we got going on here. So we'll take these measurements here and see what we got with these ones that are good numbers to look at. So with our 9mm flat point here, one of them got to about 21 3/4. The other one got to about 20.5 inches. Our 40 that we want to count here, that went through that rib simulation in the back, that went to about 27 inches. One of our 38 specials went to about 12.5 inches. The other one went to about 13 3/4 inches. So we can definitely see here, you know, there's a big difference between that old school 38 special and some flat point full metal jackets. But what we're seeing here is, I would say our 40 is definitely over penetrating too much. The real big shocker here though is that the 9mm actually penetrated, I think, less than the NATO round I tested a few weeks ago through a longer barrel. So yeah, very interesting with that. So looking at this, I would say the only one here that's really okay for carrying for self-defense based on these particular results, where we're not going to over penetrate, you know, statistically it's going to be this 38 special. You know, they did tumble and create good damage and they did not over penetrate. That's not to say these other ones wouldn't do well, and if you hit a hard barrier, it's game over, because these aren't going to go through it very well. These will go through it very, very well. So let's pull these out of the block. We'll take a look at these bullets, then I'll shoot our steel, see what kind of practical accuracy I can get with these. All right, so here's a close-up look at these bullets. Our 9mm over here, our 40 Smith & Wesson here, and our 38 special here. There was no impact in that fleece bullet stop, and I opened the whole thing up and there's no bullet in there either, so it magically disappeared. But I can kind of see out the back block that it looks like it skirted along the side. It came out right at the very edge of the back of the block, and the reason for that is because it did hit this 9mm. This was facing backwards, the first shot with our 9mm, so it looks like it hit that and then went to the left and skirted out of the block. So we won't look at that close up, but we can look at these here, and that's why I do 2 shots, because something always goes wrong. You want to at least get 1 shot that's going to be an adequate representation of what's going on. So here's our 9mm. Nice flat point, nice long bullet. And it tumbled probably because it was a little too long, you know. Flat points are nice, but when they're kind of long, they'll start to tumble. And we look at our 40, that's a nice flat point, but it's a much shorter bullet, so it's gonna truck along straighter and penetrate deeper. A 38 special, you know, surprisingly, there's not a lot of damage to these bullets. You would think that at least one of those rib simulations would cause that to really flatten out, but yeah, we don't see any flattening here. So that's a pretty tough lead alloy here. So very, very interesting overall. Not much to see here, but that's a close-up look at those. All right, 14 yards from the target. I'm just gonna get a front sight picture, line up my sights, and then pop these off as fast as I think I can hit the target. See if there's a difference for our practical accuracy. So here's our 9mm. Here's our 40 Smith & Wesson. Again, I'm having issues with this particular ammo. It's not ejecting those rounds for some reason out of this pistol. Don't really know what would cause that. I'll keep going. All right. 38 special. See what I can do with this. So very smoky, but out of all those, our most comfortable to shoot out of these pistols is going to be our 38 special. And by the way, these firearms all weigh about the same. They're all right there at like 20 ounces on my scale, so it's a good way to judge the difference in felt recoil. So definitely this was the easiest to shoot. Our 9mm more difficult. Our 40 was kind of uncomfortable. So let's back it up a little bit. All right, 40 yards from the target. I'm just gonna see what kind of accuracy I can get on steel from 40 yards. Let's see how I get here with our 9mm. See if I make any hits. Huh. So not as accurate with that as what I thought I could be. Those are hitting all over, kinda. For the most part, they're hitting very, very low. I shot under the target, and then next shot I aimed at the shoulders, at the very base of that target. So they're shooting pretty low. Let's see how I can do with our 40 here. Mag fell out. Mag fell out with this again. I think this pistol still has some issues. Not particularly reliable for me. 38 Special. Now this is a different game here because this thing shoots super soft. Don't know where these are gonna hit though. Let's see what I can do. Those feel pretty good for me. Let me back it up to 75 yards just for fun. See if I can make any hits with these. All right, 75 yards from the target for fun. Let's see what I can do here. I don't know if I'll make any hits at all, but we'll see what I can do here with our 9mm. All right, not bad for what they are. We're definitely hitting quite a bit to the left. To make the hits I made, I was aiming pretty much off the target a little bit to the right. So just shooting a little left for me. 40 Smith & Wesson. Let's see how I can do with this. No surprise there. First trigger press when I load a new magazine catches with this pistol. I've sent it back to Taurus and they don't fix it right ever. This shot definitely a lot better than what I thought it was going to shoot. I figured I'd miss every shot with that. Now 38 Special, this is getting challenging because I'm not really sure if they're going to drop or if they're going to shoot high, because sometimes when you shoot really slow rounds, your gun wants to recoil before they leave and then it'll shoot high, but then it's going to drop. So I'm just going to aim center mass and see if I can make them hit. Right, keep going with this. All right, not as accurate on that second round with this as the first round. I don't know why. I was aiming in the same spot. I'm just getting tired, but overall I'm going to say All these have pretty good accuracy for what they are at short barrels. I noticed with some of the round nose bullets I was testing at this distance, I wasn't very accurate a lot of times. With the NATO, it was pretty accurate, but a lot of times round nose are not. But I have noticed over the years that 147 grain at distance is definitely more accurate than lighter bullets, and especially on a day like today where we're getting 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts. If these were 115 grain bullets, I don't think that I would have hit that target. I think they would have missed completely, but I was hitting consistently with the 147 grain. So I'm gonna say all of these are relatively accurate for what they are. Back here was just kind of for fun because it's kind of silly to shoot short barrels that short from this distance, but I like to do it to kind of see what the outer limits of cartridges accuracy is, and it's pretty accurate for what they are, all of them. Now looking at our terminal ballistics test here, you know, they did pretty much what I thought they were going to do with the 38 and the 40. I honestly thought the 40 was going to penetrate more than what it did, actually. And I thought the 9mm was going to penetrate a lot more than what it did. So I'm surprised on both of those accounts. But the 38 Special, I'm not surprised at all. That's pretty much what a round like that will do. It won't penetrate very far being at that low of a velocity, especially after hitting a rib simulation. But I would say our 155 grain from a short barrel definitely penetrates a lot less than a 180 grain from my 5-inch barrel. And our 147 grain flat point, even though it's a flat point, that surprised me they started tumbling. You know, flat points are meant to go straight and to orient themselves straight, but it looks like at these velocities, even at 1,050 feet per second, it's just not enough with that bullet weight to keep it trucking along. And that's probably why a lot of people don't use 9mm for big dangerous animal protection, because even though in theory it sounds right, and if you hit the gel block just right, it'll go real deep. If you hit something with ribs in it, that lower amount of energy that it's working with kind of wants to send it on its way, wobbling around and maybe not penetrating enough. Now, as self-defense cartridges, without a doubt, I would say our 38 Special, even though it's the Widowmaker and it's known to not be super effective, you know, it pretty much met all the criteria of penetration we want to see in it tumbled. So I would say that's okay for self-defense. And it's very easy to shoot too. That's another thing. You know, with lead rounds, they actually load them lighter. If these were jacketed bullets, they'd have to have a higher powder charge to get the same velocities. But because lead is so slick, there's not a lot of friction in the bore, they can load them really light, and you still get the same velocity as a comparable weight full metal jacket with less recoil. So it's a good option overall. Now with the other two, I wouldn't use them for self-defense, but the 9mm looks like it wouldn't over penetrate too bad. So I'll stop talking here. Interesting test overall. You guys can decipher and tell me what you think about it. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.